The room was filled with a silence that could almost be heard. The ticking of the clock on the wall marked each second, as if time were heavier than ever. The curtains were slightly open, letting in a pale, cold light that reflected on the serious faces of the assembled family. At the head of the table, the lawyer calmly adjusted the papers with calculated precision, while everyone awaited the beginning of the reading of the patriarch's will. The protagonist, the middle son, the one who had always been the most discreet, observed every detail. The older sister, dressed with excessive elegance, looked at the lawyer with a mixture of impatience and expectation. The brother-in-law kept his arms crossed, trying to appear indifferent, but the glint in his eyes betrayed him. It was evident that everyone was there for a single reason, to find out who would inherit what. On the wall, the portrait of his father seemed to observe the scene with an air of silent judgment. That man, who had always preached values of humility and unity, was now the subject of a dispute. The protagonist felt a tightness in his chest, not only because of the recent loss, but because of what that reunion represented. He remembered the conversations with his father, the walks at dusk, the simple words that always carried profound lessons, and he thought, did he leave me anything meaningful? The lawyer cleared his throat and began to read, his firm voice breaking the silence like a blade. This is the will of Mr. Arthur Menezes. The words echoed in everyone's minds. Each sentence seemed like a thread being pulled, gradually revealing the fate of a lifetime of work and affection. The protagonist kept his eyes fixed on the paper, unaware that this would be the beginning of a revelation that would change everything, and that in that very room, he would be the only one to leave with something far more valuable than he had expected. While the lawyer organized the paperwork, the protagonist became lost in his own thoughts. It was impossible to be in that room, surrounded by his father's memory, and not remember everything they had lived through together. He recalled the simple days, walking alongside that man who never flaunted his wealth, but always taught. He remembered the long conversations on the veranda at dusk, when his father spoke about character, honesty, and the value of building something with one's own hands. He also remembered the difficult moments, when he lost his job, when he felt lost in life, and his father was the only one who remained by his side, offering not only advice but a comforting silence and a firm presence. These memories instilled in him a quiet calm and confidence. He believed that somehow those memories, that real bond, would be honored at that moment. It wasn't just about material possessions, but about recognition, about an emotional and spiritual legacy. My father knew who I was and what I did for him, he thought. He harbored a discreet but sincere hope that the will would reflect that connection. On the other hand, her sister seemed to inhabit a completely different reality. From the beginning, she had been more concerned with figures than with feelings. She spoke softly to her husband, making assumptions about the value of the house, the land, the bank account. Her eyes showed no longing, only calculation, and while the protagonist immersed himself in affectionate memories, she sank into material expectations. He observed this, with sadness but not with surprise. He knew that his sister had always sought recognition through what she could possess, not through what she could be. Even so, there was a hint of doubt there, almost imperceptible. What if she received everything? What if her father had chosen a different kind of legacy? Despite the subtle fear, he took a deep breath. My father never left me in the dark, he thought, and in that instant, he sincerely believed that the justice of that relationship would be reflected in those pages, even without imagining how difficult it would be to accept the truth that was about to be revealed. The sound of the paper being unfolded by the lawyer triggered an almost sacred silence. Everyone leaned slightly forward, as if the words to come carried the power to change destinies. The lawyer cleared his throat and, in a firm and controlled voice, began to read, "This is the will of Arthur Menezes." The first lines were formal, full of legal terms and bureaucratic expressions, but little by little, the tension began to focus on the phrases that mattered, those that would determine who would get what. When her sister's name was mentioned, a soft murmur swept through the room. To my daughter, Helena Menezes, I leave the house where I lived, a symbol of our family's memories. The lawyer paused, and the silence was replaced by restrained sighs and approving glances. Helena straightened her posture, her lips curved into an almost imperceptible smile, and her husband squeezed her hand under the table. It was confirmation of what she had always believed, that she deserved the best, that she was the favorite, the rightful heir. The protagonist kept his gaze fixed on the lawyer, waiting to hear his name. His heart beat fast, not out of greed but out of expectation. Perhaps a small piece of land, perhaps a significant object, anything that represented the bond he believed existed between them. Then came the phrase, "To my son, Daniel Meneses, I leave the antique bronze candlestick, an object of sentimental value which must remain in his possession." Those words sounded like a metallic echo, cold, cutting. A candlestick, just that. No explanation, no attached story, no mention of affection. He felt a lump in his throat and tried to maintain his composure, but the weight of embarrassment hit him hard. The looks on the faces of those present were a mixture of pity and surprise. Helena, trying to hide her laughter, commented, "Well, at least it has sentimental value." The lawyer continued reading as if nothing had happened, but Daniel's world seemed to have stopped there. He held the candlestick in his hands, as if holding an open wound. He didn't understand. Why? After everything, why only this? And deep down, without knowing it, that simple object would end up revealing what no document could tell. As soon as the lawyer uttered his last words, a heavy silence filled the room. It was the kind of silence that doesn't come from the absence of sound, but from an excess of unspoken thoughts. The air seemed denser, and even the ticking of the clock on the wall sounded like a cruel provocation. Everyone avoided looking directly at Daniel, as if the simple act of looking at him could make that awkwardness even more evident. Helena, with a poorly executed disguise, brought her hand to her lips, trying to suppress a smile, but her eyes, cold, triumphant, betrayed the satisfaction of someone who felt victorious. Her husband adjusted his jacket proudly, as if he too had inherited part of the prize. The lawyer, uncomfortable, merely lowered his eyes to the papers, trying to maintain formality and end the moment as quickly as possible. Daniel remained motionless, the heavy candlestick in his hands. It was an old object made of darkened metal, bearing the marks of time. He observed it, trying to find some meaning, any justification that would explain why his father, the man he so respected, had left him only that. The feeling was one of humiliation, as if his importance had been reduced to a forgotten ornament in a corner of the house. Embarrassment hung in the room like a shadow. Some more distant relatives whispered amongst themselves, casting pitying glances. "He was always the closest to his father," murmured an aunt. "It's sad that he was left with only this." Daniel heard and felt his blood boil, but remained silent. Shame burned more than anger. He didn't want to explode or cry. He just wanted to get out of there. She stood up calmly, trying to hide the trembling in her hands. The lawyer's choked voice still echoed in her mind. Object of sentimental value. Sentimental value. That was the inheritance his father had left him, or at least, that's what everyone thought. As he walked out of the room, feeling the weight of stares on his back, Daniel didn't know that this moment of shame would actually be the beginning of a revelation that would completely transform the meaning of his inheritance. Back at his house, Daniel closed the door behind him and leaned against it for a moment, as if needing to catch his breath after an invisible blow. The room was bathed in twilight, and the silence seemed to scream inside his head. The candlestick rested on the table, motionless, like a cruel reminder of what had just happened. "Why?" he murmured, feeling his chest tighten. "Why only this, Father?" The pain that had once been confusion was beginning to transform into anger. He paced back and forth, mentally, reliving the scene in the lawyer's office, the stifled laughter, the pitying glances, his sister's satisfied smile. Each memory seemed like a spark fueling the fire of resentment. For a few minutes, he considered getting rid of it. He gripped the candlestick firmly in his hands, determined to throw it in the trash. The cold metal seemed to mock him, reflecting his wounded expression. "Is this what I'm worth to you?" he whispered bitterly. But before he could throw it away, something inside him, an inner voice, a distant memory, made him stop. He remembered when his father used to tell him, "Not everything that seems small is worthless, son. Sometimes what shines the least holds the greatest treasure." Those words, spoken so many years ago, resonated with a strange force. He took a deep breath and placed the candlestick back on the table. He sat down before it and observed every detail. The object was heavy, with hand-carved arabesques and a slightly crooked base. It had an ancient appearance, as if it carried stories that no one remembered anymore. He ran his fingers over the cold metal and noticed small, almost imperceptible marks that seemed to form a pattern. Curious, he brought it closer to the light. There was something there, perhaps a symbol, an engraving worn by time. Anger began to give way to doubt, and doubt to instinct. The same instinct his father said he had inherited, the ability to see beyond the obvious. Daniel realized that perhaps that candlestick wasn't just a symbolic gift. Perhaps it was a message, a clue, something his father wanted to leave, but that only he would be able to understand. And for the first time that night, amidst the pain and anger, a flame of curiosity began to ignite within him. Dawn was already breaking when Daniel decided to clean the candlestick. It was more out of stubbornness than care. He wanted at least to understand why his father had chosen that object among so many possessions. He sat at the table, picked up an old cloth, and began to rub the darkened metal with slow, almost mechanical movements. The light from the lamp reflected in golden tones on the bronze, revealing details that had previously gone unnoticed. The more I cleaned, the more I realized how old and carefully crafted the candlestick was. There was an artisanal work there, a symbolism, something that seemed to transcend its material value. It was then that he noticed something strange. The base seemed slightly loose. As he tried to turn it, he heard a faint metallic click, as if an old gear had come loose after years of silence. His heart raced. He continued turning carefully until a small lid detached, revealing a secret compartment inside the candlestick. For a moment, he stood motionless, feeling a shiver run through his body. Inside, carefully folded, was a sheet of paper yellowed with age and a small iron key. With trembling hands, he unfolded the paper. The handwriting was unmistakable, firm, elegant, the same as his father's. The letter began simply, "Son, if you are reading this, it's because you were the only one who decided to look beyond what the eyes show." Daniel held his breath and continued, "Not everything that glitters is an inheritance. True wealth lies where the light shines." The words seemed enigmatic yet full of intention. He read and reread them several times, trying to understand. The phrase sounded like a code, a carefully placed clue. He looked again at the candlestick and perceived the symbolism, an object that only has value when it holds light. It was as if his father wanted to say that the true treasure was hidden, and only those with patience and faith would be able to find it. Daniel gripped the key tightly. His heart pounded erratically, a mix of disbelief and hope. His father hadn't forgotten him. This was more than a gift. It was a message, an invitation to follow a path only he could tread. That night, the candlestick ceased to be a symbol of humiliation and became the beginning of a mystery, a secret illuminated by a single flame. The following morning, Daniel awoke with a feeling that something was calling to him. The key he had found inside the candlestick wouldn't leave his mind. He spent much of the day holding it between his fingers, observing its details. It was small, made of darkened iron, with an old, almost handcrafted shape. On the head of the key, there was a small symbol engraved, the same one that was carved into the side of the candlestick. There was no doubt. There was a connection between the two. But what exactly did it open? Determined to find out, Daniel drove to his father's old house, now officially belonging to his sister. He knew she hadn't moved out yet, and that his father's office remained untouched. Entering, he felt the air heavy with memories. Every detail, the smell of paper, the stacked books, the distant sound of pages rustling through the window, seemed alive. He walked to the wooden desk where his father used to write letters and proofread documents. He ran his hand over the surface and, in an almost automatic instinct, began to lightly tap different parts of the structure. It was then that he noticed something. A baseboard sounded hollow. He knelt down, examined it carefully, and pulling hard, the wood came loose, revealing a small compartment embedded in the wall. Inside, covered by a thin layer of dust, was an antique safe with the same engraved mark that was on the key. Daniel felt his heart race. He inserted the key, and the soft click that followed echoed like a beat of destiny. Upon opening the safe, a beam of light crossed the room, reflected off the carefully stored papers inside. There were house documents, property titles, notebooks, and at the bottom a yellowed envelope with his name handwritten on it, for Daniel. With trembling hands, she opened the envelope. Inside, there was a handwritten version of the will, different from the one the lawyer had read. In it, the father explained, "I entrusted you with the mission of protecting what is ours. I left the clue in what represents the light, because I knew you would be the only one to see it." Daniel read those words with teary eyes. His father had not forgotten him. On the contrary, He had entrusted him with the greatest of legacies, the truth. That chest contained not only possessions, but the symbol of the trust and wisdom that his father had always seen in him. And in that instant, he understood. His inheritance was never the candlestick, but the secret that the light revealed. Daniel remained seated before the open safe, his heart racing and his hands still trembling. His father's letter, written in his usual firm and serene handwriting, revealed far more than he had imagined. Each line seemed carefully thought out, as if his father knew this moment would come. The words were direct, without beating around the bush. If you're reading this, it's because what I feared has happened. I trusted the wrong people too much. Daniel felt the ground give way beneath him for a moment. He continued reading, his gaze fixed on the letters that revealed a long-hidden truth. The father explained that, in the last months of his life, he had begun to distrust his daughter, Helena, and the family lawyer. Small inconsistencies in the documents, altered sums, forged signatures, everything pointed to silent manipulation. Fearing that his wishes would be distorted after his death, he decided to write a second will, in his own handwriting, and hide it along with the original documents. The candlestick, a symbol of light and vigilance, was deliberately left as a clue, in the hope that only Daniel, his patient and observant son, would find it. Upon finishing the reading, Daniel felt a mixture of indignation and relief. Indignation at realizing how betrayed his father had been by the person he trusted most, and relief at finally understanding that he hadn't been forgotten. The old man had seen beyond appearances and believed in his son's integrity. At the bottom of the envelope there was also a note: "The house and everything I have built belong to whoever carries the light of truth. You will know what to do." Daniel took a deep breath and looked around the office. That place, which had previously seemed like just a backdrop of memories, was now becoming the stage for justice. The candlestick, the safe, the letter, everything made sense. His father had left not only an inheritance, but a mission to restore the truth and bring light back to the family. He knew the next step would be difficult. He would have to confront his sister, the lawyer, and all the lies they had upheld. But for the first time, he felt no fear. He felt purpose. The truth, at last, had rekindled his flame. The sun was already beginning to set when Daniel made his decision. There was no more room for doubt or fear. He took the envelope containing the true will, the candlestick, and the original documents, and went to the house where the family had gathered days before. The same room that had been the scene of his humiliation would now be the setting for revelation. Upon arriving, he found everyone gathered again, his sister, her husband, and the lawyer, discussing renovations and plans for the newly inherited house. Seeing him enter, Helena raised her eyebrows with a disdainful smile. "Did you come to say goodbye to your memory?" she said, ironically. Daniel took a deep breath and placed the candlestick on the table. "Actually, I came to read our father's true will." The room froze. The lawyer tried to intervene, but Daniel opened the envelope firmly. "Before he died, my father wrote this document in his own hand, fearing that his wishes would be manipulated. He trusted me to find the truth." His voice was firm but heavy with emotion. As he began to read, each word sounded like a sharp blow against the silence of the room. "I trusted Daniel because he carries the light of truth. The house and everything I built belonged to someone who never extinguished that flame." Helena paled. Her husband tried to whisper something, but she remained motionless, her gaze lost. The lawyer lowered his head, unable to hold Daniel's gaze. The evidence was before them: the original documents, the forged signatures, the altered records. The charade crumbled before the calm, determined voice of someone who had been treated as invisible. When he finished reading, Daniel neither smiled nor celebrated. He simply lit the candlestick and placed it on the table. His light guided the way here. His father's justice has been served. The glow of the flame reflected on each face, revealing discomfort, shame, and regret. Helena, in tears, tried to justify herself, but Daniel simply replied calmly, "Father knew everything. He only hoped that one day you too would learn to see." At that moment, power changed hands, not out of revenge, but out of truth. The candlestick remained lit, a symbol of the light that the father had left for the son, who never gave up believing. Night fell serenely over the old family home. The open windows let in a gentle breeze that swayed the curtains and carried with it the scent of the garden flowers, the same aroma Daniel remembered from his childhood. when his father used to sit by the fireplace telling stories. Now, he was there again, but in a different role. That home, once a symbol of division and greed, had been restored. The lies were undone. His father's name cleared, and the truth at last illuminated every corner of that house. Above the fireplace he placed the candlestick, the same object that had been a source of shame, pain, and doubt. Now, it held a different meaning. The flame Daniel lit flickered gently, casting golden reflections across the walls. The glow illuminated the old portraits, the worn furniture, and the books his father loved so much. It was as if his presence still lingered in that place, silent and protective. Daniel sat before the fire and watched the light dance. He thought about everything he had experienced in the last few days, the betrayal, the discovery, the justice, the forgiveness. Each step had transformed him. He understood at that moment that his father had left him not only possessions or instructions, but a profound lesson. True inheritance is not material, it is spiritual. It is that which continues to shine even when everything around seems dark. As the fire crackled, he whispered the words that would conclude his journey. Not all inheritance comes in gold, sometimes it comes in the form of light. He smiled serenely, feeling that he finally understood his father's purpose. The flame reflected in his eyes represented not only remembrance, but continuity, the passing of wisdom from one generation to the next. Outside, the starry sky completed the scene. The house seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, as if its own destiny had been purified. The candlestick remained lit, steady, shining with a soft, eternal intensity, a light that never goes out, a symbol of love that withstands time, death, and darkness. And in that instant, Daniel knew. The true inheritance had finally fulfilled its mission.